In the early decades of the 20th century, people struggling with mental illness had few options.
Families were at their wits' end, didn't know what to do with people who had lots of mental symptoms. Institutions were very overcrowded, and the treatments were very, very difficult, like hydrotherapy, where people would be immersed in water, insulin therapy, where the doctors would make the patient's blood sugars go down to zero and they would have seizures.
In 1936, a new surgical technique called lobotomy began to be used. The experimental procedure, which partially severed the frontal lobes from deeper parts of the brain, was said to calm and even cure those struggling with mental illness.
Dr. Walter Freeman and Dr. James Watts, who was a neurosurgeon, were claiming that they had great success, that they were restoring a good life to people who had been suffering, and they had become famous.
One of Freeman's many skills, was cultivating the media.
Lobotomy was felt to be mainstream science. It wins the Nobel Prize.
But more than 40,000 surgeries later, the brutal truth about lobotomy would come to light.
They were basically going in and mushing around brain tissue, and unfortunately, in many cases, leaving patients worse off.
Alzheimer's disease. The illness deteriorates vital brain functions, robbing patients of their most basic cognitive abilities. As the disease progresses, the familiar becomes foreign. Friends and family turn into strangers. In a healthy brain, neurons communicate through electrical charges and the release of chemicals across tiny gaps or synapses. Other cells, called astrocytes and microglia, keep the brain clean, sweeping away unwanted debris. In an Alzheimer's brain, excess proteins, called beta amyloid and tau, build up, creating what's called plaques and tangles, essentially choking the neurons from the inside. The tangles spread and infect healthy nerve cells. Eventually, inflammation sets in, creating a downward spiral in the ability of neurons to communicate, and the brain actually shrinks.
Somehow the brain is really good at extracting patterns and assigning meaning to these patterns of activity, and from that you get your entire subjective world. All the colors and the sounds and everything that's going on around you, it's actually happening in darkness in there. Different animals sense different parts of their environment. We happen to have eyes and ears and nose and fingertips and so on, but other animals have completely different machinery. If you're an echolocating bat, you fly around in the dark and you chirp and you get back these air compression waves, and that's how you can construct a three-dimensional model of the world. The interesting part is that presumably every animal imagines that the Umwelt is the entire world out there, just like we do with our vision and our hearing and so on. We think, oh, I'm seeing reality, but in fact, we're only seeing a small slice of it.
Babies prefer looking at things that are moving, and most especially when that movement is so-called biological. In other words, any movement produced by a living being.
In the early 20th century, less than 1% of the population experienced a period of depression in their lives. And today, we estimate that 1 person in 5, 20% of the population, will experience depression at some point in their lives.
One of the countries most recently affected by the spectacular rise in cases of depression is Japan. The nation became aware of the issue in 2000, when for the first time a company, Dentsu, the most prestigious ad agency in Japan, was found guilty in court and therefore responsible for the suicide of one of its employees who had been overworked. The number of these trials has increased since then, and the Japanese began to believe that depression was the primary explanation for the significant increase in suicides. A causal link was therefore established between overwork, depression, and suicide.
One of the major rights we need to have is the right to be tired.
And the right to be sad.
And the right to be sad, which does indeed go with it.
The failure of the brain to sort of keep its house clean and clear away these things that it needs to be clearing away during sleep may actually be setting the stage for the development of diseases like Alzheimer's disease.
In 1972, a medical school from a small city in New Zealand embarked on the ultimate nature-nurture test. They decided to take every child born in the city that year and follow them for life. For 40 years, scientists have probed every nook and cranny of their existence. Their medical history, their personality, their genes, criminal convictions,
hands on your cheeks,
relationships, successes, failures. The experiment is called the Dunedin Study, and its subjects are now the 1,000 most studied people in the world, and the richest source of information on what really makes us who we are.